the more volatility there's in the market, the more disruption, the more there's the need for reliable, third-party, neutral information around vessels and location and schedules.
When you evaluate a carrier, you don't just do it on freight rates. 95% of everything you see in your house is manufactured goods that's shipped in a container. It's big, right?
What's one thing that you would change, like in the way that people buy and sell freight today? Welcome to the Freight Debate, the ultimate destination for supply chain professional, logistics leader, and anyone who's ever wondered what really keeps the world moving. My name is Fabio. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Xeneta, and today with me I have one of our latest addition in Xeneta, Mr. Simon. Simon, welcome.
Hi, Fabio. Good to be here.
Simon is the VP of Ocean Liner Networks and Schedule at Xeneta and founder of eeSea, a maritime supply chain company, and we will learn a ton about eeSea today. So we will have a conversation around the latest acquisition of Xeneta. And for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to have a conversation around how this move is important for the industry and what our customers can expect in terms of products and things that are changing. So Simon, maybe a good place to start. Let's assume that I'm new to the industry. I've never heard of eeSea before. What is eeSea and what sort of intelligence do you offer?
That's all right. The origin story, or what is eeSea? So eeSea is essentially a global mapping of the container liner shipping world. Everything from the so-called liner services down to the individual vessels. When are they calling at ports? The vessel schedules, forecasts, historical schedules. It's a global map. Call it the Google Maps of container shipping, the global atlas of container shipping. That's the short version. We'll talk more, but that's the short version. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's awesome. But I'm curious, why and how did you start exploring this data? Why schedules? Why the maps?
So the origin story, yeah. Look, I feel like an old man when I say I spent 25 years in the industry. I spent 10 years with Maersk. I spent 5 years with a terminal operator in the Middle East called Gulftainer. And I think the reason the seed for eeSea came from the fact that in my last position in Maersk, myself and my team, we were responsible for basically what we call supply and demand in the container shipping industry. So how many vessels are on the sea, how much capacity is in the market, and what's the demand in the market, how many containers are being moved. It's a super important aspect for container shipping. And my team was sitting and doing that in Excel sheets. This was back in the time when everything looked like Microsoft Access 96, but we were sitting and doing this in Excel sheets, and we needed as a resource where we could just tap into and get the very latest updates. That was the thought. Then I went on, I worked for container shipping, for a terminal operator for 5 years. And the same thing was the problem when we wanted to have up-to-date information about liner networks. What's happening down in that other port? What's happening down in Jebel Ali? What's happening in other ports? We always had to sort of look for that resource. We didn't have anything great. There were resources out there, but they weren't great in my view. So back in 15 actually, I decided to build that database and say, look, we can map the global container shipping world, and we can sell that information to everything from ports and terminals to carriers and BCOs and logistics providers. That was sort of the seed of it, if that resonates, yeah.
Yeah, I have a tremendous appreciation for, people like yourself that starts a company. And I also find the similarity between your journey and Patrick's journey, right? He worked for Kuehne+Nagel for so many years. He saw the inefficiencies, the tendering process, and says there has to be a better way. And you go and build a company. So kudos to you for all you did so far.
Thank you. No, yeah, you're right. You're right, Fabio. Yeah.
It's not for everybody,
No, but I also think I wanted to say I think it has to start in a problem, right? It has to start in a problem the industry experiences. Now, whether you can execute on that, whether you can do it properly, that's another thing. But if it starts from your vision of something you'd like to build, that's not where it is. It has to start in a problem. So, and I hear that same thing from Patrick as well. There was a problem in the industry, rates very much so. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good segue into the next question. So, who are the people that are suffering this pain? Who are the people with the problem? Who are the customers that you serve from eeSea data perspective?
So look, I think from an eeSea point of view, when we started out, we felt that we could serve almost everyone in the industry, because schedules, liner networks and schedules is such a basic component of the industry, which is also a bit of a person chalice or a bit of a challenge, right? Because you can't serve everyone. You shouldn't necessarily serve everyone. But we certainly came to the point where we could sell the market intel, the part of the market intel part of it to ocean carriers and to ports and terminals. And also the operational, where are the vessels? What's the forecast? When is my vessel going to arrive into my port? We sold that very much to ports and terminals in the eeSea days, if you will, which is up until a couple of months ago, right? And then in the last year, I'd say the last 2 years, we found a real interest from cargo owners, from shippers and logistics providers, and saying, all right, well, one thing is the vessel schedules and when is, Emma Maersk arriving into Rotterdam. But what I'm really interested in is the port schedule. So, and I think that's where the coming together, I think that lays up to what we're talking about here today, Fabio, is the layup really is to say customers, shippers, cargo owners, and logistics providers are looking at a port-to-port level, not just on the granular level, where's my cargo vessel, when is it going to arrive, but also on a more high level, what's been the carrier performance. So we served a little bit too broad. I think that Xeneta is more clear on who are the actual customers here, but we certainly had customers all across the logistics world or container shipping world, if you will.
Yeah, and I think it started as a partnership. So the Xeneta point of view is that our customers were asking and demanding us to provide some insights into capacity, reliability, and transit times.
And that was the interesting thing for how we developed between Xeneta and eeSea, because you were a customer of eeSea, right? You bought our data and used that, right? So yes.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So maybe let's talk about why this acquisition is good. Why do you think, and I give you my perspective after yours, but why do you think this makes sense for the industry and for us?
For me, the coming together really makes sense for the industry and for cargo owners in particular, shippers and logistics providers, because when you evaluate a carrier, you don't just do it on freight rates. Don't get me wrong, freight rates are a hugely important component, but freight rates are impact. We actually have a session at the summit coming up about this, right? The trade-offs, we call it the trade-offs that shippers make in evaluating the carriers. And it's not just freight rates. It is operational performance. What are the transit times offered? What are the transit times delivered? Delays, origin, destination, cancellation rates, so much more, trade capacity, reliability. And I think if the idea that we talked about from the beginning when we started talking eeSea and Xeneta was bringing those two under the same roof and making a really cool solution out of that is what makes this worthwhile. I personally think. So you're kind of adding a leg to what Xeneta offers to the customer side. Not just a leg, but a big component, right?
And I think two market factors around this is that I see shippers and forwarders becoming more and more sophisticated in terms of data and analysis. So there's a desire to move beyond pricing and into more trade-offs. Maybe I'm okay to pay more if I get more. So that's something that we have seen as a need coming out. And the other one, I think disruption is also a big factor here, right? The more volatility there's in the market, the more disruption, the more there's the need for reliable third-party neutral information around vessels and location and schedules.
And I think, if I may add to that, Fabio, I think we've been talking about data-driven for years. That's been sort of almost a bullshit bingo term, right? Everybody wants to be data-driven, but I think Xeneta is and was an example of that, of being data-driven, right? Everybody had an opinion about where the freight rates went, but now you actually log onto a platform and you see where they went, and you have it down to a very level detail, very granular detail. And I think eeSea provided the same things on schedules. Everybody had an opinion about, whether MSC's performance or Hapag's or OOCL's performance was good or bad. Now you got numbers on it. You've got actual numbers. And not only do you have numbers on it on a high level, you've got granular, in-depth numbers. And coming together again is providing not just providing that granular insight is what we really think could be interesting for the industry here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And becoming kind of the single source of truth for everything that has to deal with procurement decision making, I think it's a powerful vision. We spoke a bit about it on, everyone has their definition of reliability. And I know we spoke about this at length through the process. And so I would love for you to highlight, how do you think about reliability? How do we measure it, and why is different than what's available in the market?
Stop me if it gets a little bit technical, but the way I look at it, a carrier offers to a shipper, BCO, 3 levels of schedules in a way, or network. They offer what we call them the Proforma, but it's, popularly speaking, it's the flyer you see on the website, right? Go to CMA's website, you've got a flyer for the FAL2. This is what they offer to the customer on a long-term basis. Every Thursday at 1800, you're going to have a vessel departing Singapore. Every Tuesday, 39 days later, you're going to have a vessel arriving into Rotterdam. That's the standard Proforma, level 1. Level 2, you have the short-term schedules. Now reality hits. We're not going to get that vessel out on Thursday. That particular vessel was 2 days delayed. The next vessel was 3 days late. Usually the carriers produce somewhere between 30 and 60-day schedules on their website. So they'll actually go on this FAL2 service. We've got this is actually a Costco shipping Sagittarius vessel, and that has this schedule for the next 60 days. And most of the time it fits into those weekly slots, but often it doesn't. And then eventually something gets delivered. We said it was going to be there on Thursday. We predicted it was going to be there on Friday, but eventually it came on Saturday, right? So Proformas, long-term schedules, and actually delivered schedules. What we compare when we talk about schedule reliability is the Proforma versus what was actually delivered. Dear CMA, you said there was going to be an arrival into Rotterdam every Thursday at 1800. And this vessel was going to be there on Thursday the 18th. But it arrived on Saturday the 20th. It was 2 days late. And we have that down to the minute. It was Thursday 1800, but it arrived Saturday, 1835. So it was 48 hours and 35 minutes late. That's our definition of schedule reliability. You can also compare, what did CMA say 20 days before arrival into Rotterdam, or 30 days arrival before? If you're a BCO, you'll often look at, what did CMA say at the time of booking, my booking. We think this is hugely important, but we call that forecast accuracy, because there's a difference between what CMA said 10 days before arrival into Rotterdam, and 20 days, and 30 days, and 50 days, and 90 days. It's super important how good they are at forecasting the carriers, but it's called forecasting accuracy. And the moment you introduce that timeline of it, it becomes a difficult number to gauge. Whereas they promised me every Thursday, they delivered Saturday. That's easy to understand. And we've got that down there. So reliability versus forecast accuracy are, for me, 2 different things. But other parties in the industry have gotten used to having forecast accuracy be synonymous with schedule reliability. And there's not a common definition of it, but does that make sense in terms of the primary difference between the two?
It makes a lot of sense to me. And if I put myself in our customer shoes, like at time of procurement, or when you're doing tendering, when you're evaluating a bids, what you care is, well, is there a weekly service, and what day is going to be? That is the initial promise that carriers are making to the shippers, and then you hold them accountable on that promise.
Exactly.
And let's talk about what are eeSea's strengths, right? In terms of how fast do you get this data? How many vessels do you track? And I know you guys do some forecasting as well. So can you talk us about what are eeSea's strengths?
There's a number of different strengths here. I think one, if I may say, there's the scope, the breadth and the depth of the data is one I want to talk about. And the other one is the accuracy and the quality of it. And so let me start out by talking about the scope and the breadth of it. So there's about 2,000 liner services globally, with about 6,000 container-capable vessels globally deployed. Everything from your 25,000 TEU vessel down to your 200 TEU schooner sailing around here. We map all of them. We track all of them constantly, and how they move around the world. Services change maybe every 6 or 12 months, but vessel deployment changes constantly. Delays happen constantly. That's the nature of it, of course. That's the breadth and the depth of it. So we go to that level of it. And then we go all the way down to the vessel level, vessel per port. So Emma Maersk was in Antwerp at that point in time, in Rotterdam at that point in time, in Hamburg at that point in time, and then she is going to. So that's the breadth and the depth of it. The quality of it is, I'd love to tell you I have a big fat AI button that just collects all this data and then, pots it in and everything. I think we all think that that's possible in this world of today. I don't personally think it is. I think, so we actually have a team sitting who are experts at this. We've got an Asia Europe team, a North America team, and there's human AI, call it that, human brains sitting and looking at that. Because take the simple example, if you ask 4 different carriers about when they're going to arrive into Rotterdam with the same vessel, 4 Ocean Alliance carriers on the same vessel into the same port, you're not unlikely to get 4 different answers. So there's got to be a human saying, well, I think that this particular carrier has a better forecast accuracy and/or. We've got humans sitting and looking at that. And that gives us the ability to be more critical of the data. And it gives us the ability to understand sources that are not necessarily data driven. News. Hey, we're hearing that Shanghai is building up some congestion here. Or look, there's this storm hitting Taiwan right now. Maybe what's that going to mean for vessels sailing through the Taiwan Strait or the Yellow Sea? That kind of thing we can take into account. And we try and do that. It's a huge, complex world map to paint. Don't get me wrong, it really is. But I think we do it pretty well. And I think that's I haven't seen anyone else out there doing it to that level, that granularity, breadth, depth, and quality. That's my personal opinion. Color me, Peyton. I'm colored. I'm not neutral in this. I'm biased, but that's my personal opinion.
And Simon, for the audience, I worked for a carrier for almost 10 years. I can tell you, even if you ask 4 people in the same company, they will probably give you 4 different dates of when the vessel is arriving. So it's I can see the pain. Let's talk a bit about the complementary value here, like of having cost versus performance, right? And I was talking to customers the other week where imagine you are a retailer, right? And you have a collection that has to be on the shelves by a certain date. There are certain times of the year, or certain commodities or certain shippers where faster transit, reliable transit, having capacity is massively more important than rates, right? So can you talk about how do you see cost versus performance, and maybe what are some of the decisions that you can make if you have access to both data sets?
Yes. So look, I think you're entirely right. And I think that's exactly what we call the trade-offs. That's why the combination is so powerful. Look, my numbers are probably outdated. I remember back in the days when we talked about how the average value, the dutiable value of a container was about $50,000. It's probably more today. Maybe let's just say it's $100,000, right? You'll have shippers of scrap metal who are down to $20,000, $25,000, and you'll have shippers of, I'm saying diamonds, but something high value, which will have $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 of cargo value in the container, right? It's a huge difference. If you're shipping $20,000 containers, whether your cost of going from Shanghai to Rotterdam is $1,800 and $1,900 is a big percentage of your total cost in your logistics cost, right? Whereas if your cargo value is $400,000, you're not necessarily interested in whether you pay $500 or let's say $200 more. You're more interested in the cost of having $400,000 of cargo on the water. And whether that cargo is on the water for 45 days or 48 days, or whether your carrier has a bad tendency to roll you or basically miss a transshipment or something like that. So you're more interested in the performance of it, right? So high value goods versus low value goods is one huge component of how you make that particular trade-off. But then also the business model that you're having. Some shippers, I heard one huge shipper, let's not mention names here, who said, look, and with pretty high value goods, by the way, who said, look, if the vessel arrives within 3 days of the planned arrival, we call that on time. Okay. So they've just simply decided to put that buffer into their supply chain. And whether their factory to door is 98 days or 105 days, doesn't matter to them, right? So again, it also depends on the nature of it. Is it red t-shirts for the specific fall season here, or is it a couch that you can sell all year long? I guess, does that make sense? Cost versus performance. And every shipper is different in that one, right? In that scale.
I remember when I was at Amazon, right, it was a different scope because we were doing last mile, but we had metrics that were telling us how much is 1 hour of time worth in rates and what are you willing to sacrifice if you can go faster or if you have more reliable transit.
to look at that, I mean, some shippers are very, very advanced on that, has super advanced calculations on what is the cost of an extra day on the water and stuff like that. Because let's face it, again, for a lot of these, ocean shipping is actually not the biggest cost component. It is more the last mile or the factory, the production cost of getting that t-shirt into the factory, into the shop is not, it's not the ocean shipping that costs a lot. So some companies will have huge calculations on how much one extra day costs, and others will be, let's see, I'll just squeeze my supplier and that's all I do, right? So yeah.
And if we want to talk about some use cases, right, what are some of the times where as a shipper or as LSP you would go and use this data? And maybe I can start because by the time this podcast is going to air, we have launched the carrier scorecard, which I think is a very unique mix of all these data sets, where we allow shippers to evaluate different carriers on a subset of lanes. So you select your lanes that you care about, and you're going to be able to compare rates, transit times, capacity, reliability, but also any additional derivatives data sets that we can come up with. So we spoke about, how many times a carrier is changing the schedule, the stability of a schedule. We talk about delays at origin, destination. So there is so much more data that can be helpful during a QBR with a carrier or during a negotiation, or maybe during tendering when you're selecting your carrier mix and who you're going to work with. So do you have other use cases or times where you can make better decisions by having access to this rich data set?
Yeah, so I think exactly what you say is the classical one, which is also where Xeneta has been classically really strong, right? In that negotiation period. And classically, it used to happen every 12 months. Now I hear contracts being every 6 months or every 3 months. But in that negotiation and in that classical evaluation of your carrier QBRs or what they are, I think one of the other use cases, there are many others, but one of the other use cases that we talked about for at length as well, Fabio, is so now you've decided on your 3 primary carriers, right? You've contracted with them, you've given them your share of wallet, 50% for you, 30% for you, 20% for you. And now you're ready. Now you're actually ready. So now you've ordered those, 20,000 red t-shirts from Chittagong that has to go to Chicago. And you're ready. And normally you'd pick your primary carrier in that segment. So normally let's just say your primary carrier would be CMA here. But now you're looking at the eeSea data and you're finding out, hey, hang on, CMA has 3 blank sailings in the next 3 weeks out of my port here. Let's say Yantian to Long Beach, 3 blank sailings for here. That's a problem. Should I go to my other secondary carrier, right? Or should I go to CMA and talk about and say, hey, look, do you have other options in this particular port pair? What are you going to do? So being able to evaluate in the time of booking, in the moment of booking, whether my carrier, first, second, tertiary carrier is available is really powerful, I think. That's probably one of the data sets. And then what we hear a lot about is also, or use cases, sorry. What we also hear about is the, call it more contextual data. What's the trade capacity in a given trade lane? How much, how many blankings have there been in the last 6 months in the Trans-Pacific? How much of it has come from Gemini versus Ocean versus Premier Alliance by carrier, by month? It's not directly related to your conversation with your carrier, but the contextual information of it, trade capacity, reliability, is super important for not super important, but it really gives that context, not just for the procurement guy sitting in front of the carrier, but also sometimes we hear that going into top management. The procurement guy needs to appraise his CEO or his CFO about what's happening out in the industry, and that's really important. So yeah, I think those are 2 use cases. There are many more, but I think those are the 2 sort of most obvious, aside from what you already mentioned, Fabio.
Yeah, one thing that was super impressive for me when we dove a bit deeper into the data was that you're able to spot changes in services and vessel rotation before they're actually announced, right? Because carriers are going to start skipping a certain port or maybe changing the rotation a little bit, and they do a couple of trials before actually announcing more broadly. So that's super impressive, right? You're freshest information that even the carrier are announcing. And that I think is very valuable for booking time decisions.
True. Very true. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about the product, right? What's changing for our customers? What's the integration plan? And how do we transition? Today, we still have 2 different products. What's the plan? What's the transition? And what can our customers expect over the next 6 to 12 months?
I think we should be honest and say that's a work in progress, right? We have some very specific plans that we want to get at, but it's always you have to not paint yourself into a corner and say, look, this is it. But I think the general feeling, correct me if I'm wrong here, Fabio, is to say for the next 6 to 9 months, at least for now, the eeSea platform as you know it, the data delivery. Well, no, let me turn that further back and say the eeSea product, the eeSea underlying eeSea data set as it is now will continue through. The whole team has come over. The operations team, what we do today will continue in a Xeneta context. It'll be merged into Xeneta and everything, but the whole team is there. We're working on it. We're actually just improving it and making that better. Now, how it's going to be presented towards the customer then, as opposed to underneath the hood, but how it's going to be presented to the customer, I think you'd say that in the next 6 to 12 months, you'll continue seeing the eeSea platform as it is. app.eesea.com. Little plug here, go sign up, app.eesea.com/register and stuff like that. Sign up for a free trial and have a look at that. That'll continue. Everything there will continue. And the visualizations that we work in today with Tableau and stuff like that will continue. Now, obviously, the web app, we are what we call the web app, the navigating through, finding your service, finding your port, finding your vessel, finding your port pair and stuff like that. That will be merged into Xeneta. We've got some really interesting, screens going on right now. I think, Fabio, correct me if I'm wrong. I think you'll show some of it, some tasters at the summit, right?
It would have been shown by now at the summit, but we are targeting to release the first product in the first part of next year. But I think it's interesting also, there are some benefits that we have been already able to provide to our customers, right? So if you look at transit time, capacity, and schedule reliability, for example, we were able to massively increase the scope. So we went from covering 35 corridors to over 5,000 port pair. And we went from a regional level to detailed port-to-port data. And also the refresh rate, like we refresh it daily instead of what it used to be.
No, you're right. And you're right. So I'm taking it from the side of saying what's in eeSea today. That will eventually be ported over to the Xeneta platform in some shape or form. And the same thing with the Tableau dashboards and the data delivery in that way. A lot of that will come over to the Xeneta platform in some shape or format. That we're looking at, and we're talking to our current customers about that. But then there's, like you rightly say, Fabio, the data set that you already had on the Xeneta platform, which was reliability, transit time, trade capacity, blank capacity. What else? What am I missing here? Those are the ones. Those were replaced already on day one, I think, a month and a half ago, right? And not only replaced the old suppliers, but with eeSea data, but significantly improved in terms of granularity, depth, and stuff like that, right? So you're right, and Xeneta, current Xeneta customers will already be enjoying those, for the last month and a half. Am I saying that right? I think so. Yeah.
You're right. And we have seen very good adoption, especially on the transit time data sets. And what I'm also excited about is we're going to start to use AI agents in order to create insights from combined data sets, right? Maybe your rates are really good, but your transit time is getting worse. Then you should consider going in the spot market or changing carriers or open a tender or wait to tender. So we want to help our customer to make decisions by combining different data sets together. And I think it's going to be very powerful because today it's so hard to do and nobody has all this data under the same hood.
I agree. I think everybody, it's been sort of this fluffy word at every tech conference I've been to, actionable insights and stuff like that. But you're right. That really is where we have to get to, right? And I think it's going to be hard. It's going to be really, really hard driving those insights out and making sense of them for that customer, because you get a congestion notice at a port that you're not using, and it devalues the notification experience for you. But if, on the other hand, you can surface those notifications for the customer, that's really, really powerful, right? And that's, again, where coming together the two data sets can be truly game changing. So, look, that's what we're working on. That's what we're working on right now, and that's going to take a while to do that. But the idea is, of course, to not just have a Xeneta platform and an eeSea platform, but something that combined makes the classical 1 + 1 = more than 2, basically, right?
I think we can move towards the closing segment where we have some rapid fires questions for you. And the first one is, you've been doing eeSea for a while. What's the most surprising insight that you were able to get at eeSea?
No, I'll mention two. I'll say two, and I think I've already mentioned them at a conference, so they're not completely new. But I think one interesting insight was I have this story about the story of COVID, where you can literally see how at the beginning of COVID, the industry had pretty decent reliability, had a certain capacity, for example, from Asia to North America. Then COVID hits, suddenly all the vessels are sitting waiting outside of LA Long Beach for 30 days. Reliability goes through the floor, not just because the vessel, but because everything is shutting down. There are bottlenecks all over the system. The freight rates go through the roof, and suddenly every Tom, Dick, and Harry starts a new service. So theoretically, more capacity comes into the market with new services. I mean, we had retailers starting services, right? But what effectively happens is that even though there's more theoretical capacity in the market, because of those delays that just pull out capacity, you actually saw that capacity growth was very, very less, much less during that whole COVID period. And keep in mind, this was when everybody was sitting at home and we couldn't travel off to the Caribbean and Thailand. So we were buying flat screens and training equipment instead, right? So volumes went up, capacity was stable, which is obviously the explanation of it. That's a really, really interesting insight when you look at a timeline data set. I think a funny story for me was when the Houthis started shooting. Not funny. It's not funny when the Houthis started shooting, but a funny insight was, you know, when the Houthis started shooting down the Red Sea in December 23, we saw, you can see what you can track the vessels, right? And so we saw Gunvor Maersk, one of the Maersk vessels that was on its way from, I think it was Barcelona to Port Klang in Malaysia through the Suez Canal. She came down, she sat south of Jeddah, went through the Suez Canal, sat south of Jeddah. Then she had to wait because now they'd started shooting. She went back up through the Suez Canal, up to Malta. Then apparently somebody in head office said, no, we think they're stopped shooting now. Go back. She went back through the Suez Canal a third time, sat south of the Suez Canal, and then finally they gave the order and said, no, we're not going to go through the Suez Canal. So she went back through the Suez Canal a fourth time and finally ended up sailing around Africa to Port Klang. 4 times transit of Suez. This is many $100,000 of every transit, right, in the space of 28 days. That was the volatility we were seeing back then. That was the confusion we were seeing back then, right? I think that's a funny story in a way, anecdotally.
That's an amazing insight, and I like that you provide 2 examples when the world was getting crazy, right? We've seen the Red Sea and COVID, and you're able to get some insights on those moments, which is super important. How do you think eeSea changes negotiations between shippers and carriers?
Well, it's basically what we've been talking about for the last hour. I think eeSea provides that additional angle, right? You can't just pick your. It's a bit like when you book a flight ticket, right? You can go for the cheapest ticket, but if it's, pardon me, Michael O'Leary, but if it's Ryanair and you know you're going to have to pay to go to the toilet, or you know you're going to get squashed at the airport, maybe you decide to pay $200 more. So not just the rate. If you looked at the rate, you'd pick Ryanair, but if you looked at some other things, you might decide to pick others. Giving that additional context, I think is what we do. And that's what the combination does, right? Combination of Xeneta and eeSea.
It's also the transit time, right? I always fly to Oslo often, and there are some crazy prices, but I need to spend 37 hours flying.
Exactly. So that operational component together with the rates is really important, right?
If you think about Xeneta's mission is to change how we buy and sell freight, what's one thing that you would change, like in the way that people buy and sell freight today?
I think this leads us to the idea of index-linked contracts, right? I think when you talk to people outside the industry about how the industry works, and you tell them, look, and again, I'm using names here as examples, but a big shipper in the US, 100,000 FFEs, can go to Maersk and say, look, I'd like to sign a contract with you. And they sign a contract. They're given a rate for 12-month rate. And they, in return, sign on for a minimum quantity, right? MQC. We'll give you 50,000 FFEs in the next 12 months. 6 months into that contract, the rates have dropped from $2,500 in, say, Yantian to Long Beach to $2,000. And now suddenly that shipper comes back to the carrier and says, hey, hang on, I'd like to renegotiate. And don't get me wrong, that's when it goes this way. The same thing then happens when it goes the other way, right? When the markets go up, then the carriers will say, well, I know we signed a contract, but maybe I need you to pay a little bit more. And that bumping of heads has been the background noise, powerful background noise for the industry for the God knows how long, but it's been exacerbated over the last, I'd say, 10 years with the volatility we're seeing. I don't think you can ever entirely remove that, but if you can go from not just having freight rate somewhat visibility, but having index-linked index-linked contracts with freight rates moving in tandem with the market goes up by $500. We all agree you go up by $400, and if it moves down by 500, you go down by 400. If you can remove part of that butting of heads, and trust me, it's a butting of heads between the carriers and the shippers, and I think most of the listeners here will relate to that. You can't entirely remove it, but maybe if you can remove some of that and you can start focusing on all the other things, all the other trade-offs that we're talking about, the transit time. You rolled me. Your invoices are wrong. Yeah, well, you're not giving me the 40,000 FFEs you committed to. If you can start talking about those things instead and then have the freight rate move with the market, that's pretty powerful. It's one of the reasons why I thought it would be interesting for eeSea to join Xeneta. I really buy into that mission and vision because I think it's possible. And that would be a sea change, pun intended, in the industry. I really would.
I think that's fantastic. And I'll give you a wild prediction. And I will be wrong for sure because all predictions are wrong. But I do think there's one day in a very distant future where we will do indexing not only using rates, but service level will be part of indexing agreements as well. So that as a shipper, you are okay to pay more if you get great service and the price can be higher in exchange of better transit or capacity. So I do think there's a world in the future where additional variables are going to make it into index-linked contracts.
Look, Fabio, thank you for saying that. You're entirely right, because that happens elsewhere in the industry. When a carrier negotiates with a terminal, it's not unusual to say, hey, if you provide me 20 berth or 25 berth moves an hour with your cranes and you move my ship faster, I'll pay you more. And if you do less, there's a penalty. It's not unusual to do that. So why not? Why not have not just rate indexes, but performance indexes where you again turn on the levers? What's important? Destination delay, origin delay, transit time, cancellation rate, stuff like that. Of course, yes. That's a good point. Really good point.
That was our last question, Simon. So this was incredibly fun. We should do it more often, but thankfully we will do it more often because now you joined Xeneta and we will have many more chances to talk about the industry and our data.
I think it's a truly interesting time in the industry. We're at this place where tech has entered the landscape 15 years ago, and tech came in with huge promises, and too big promises. You already know some of those venture capital backed things that came out with big promises and stuff like that. There's a crunch time now where you're not looking at just what did we promise, but shippers and carriers for that, and everybody else in the industry are holding their tech platforms accountable. That's truly interesting. That's where it's not just all marketing and hot air, but when you get to a point where as a company, as a solution for our customers, do we deliver? I love that. And again, the journey is long. Let's not get too pompous about what we do here. But I think if we remain humble about that, between us, you and me, Fabio, and there's some really interesting propositions because it's a huge industry and it's this background industry that so few people know about. But $1 trillion industry moving God knows how many containers every year, and 95% of everything you see in your house is manufactured goods, is shipped in a container. It's big, right? So make a difference here, and we make a big difference. That was a bit too poetic, wasn't it?
It's amazing. It's amazing. Thank you. For all our customers and prospects, if you want to get in touch and talk to us about how you can use this data, or if you want to get a free trial and try some of the eeSea information, that's also an opportunity. For everyone who listened to us for the last 40 minutes, thank you for staying with us. Don't forget to hit subscribe, join the debate, and let's move the industry forward together. See you on the next one, and thank you, Simon.
See you in the next one. Thanks, Fabio. Cheers.